kind of settle down. But we're glad that you are here. Okay, and I guess this is the time that we will begin. I'm your host, Abraham L. Funches Jr., and I want to welcome you to this first edition, I guess, of the community book read, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. We're excited that you're here. We are thrilled that this is something that is community-wide, and we hope that this certainly whets your appetites as we begin to engage in book discussions all across the community. Tonight, we do have an illustrious panel of educators, and we want to give each of them an opportunity to tell a little bit more about themselves. The educators that we do have with us tonight are Drs. Nook, Kosen, Salinger, Lindeman, Pattee, and Holcomb. And it wasn't quite planned this way, but Dr. Lindeman is the only female on the panel. I don't know what we're going to do about that, but we're going to figure it out. Perhaps she will tell us what we're going to do about that. But anyway, let us begin with Dr. Nook. Dr. Nook, would you please, sir, just tell us a little bit more about who you are, where you work?
Yeah, thank you, Abraham. I'm Mark Nook. I'm the president of the University of Northern Iowa, and I've been here a little over 3.5 years now.
Fabulous. Dr. Kosen? You're mute.
I always forget that. Yeah, sorry. I'm Daryl Colson. I'm the president of Wartburg College, and I've been here a little bit over 11 years here in Waverly, Iowa.
Wow, fabulous. Dr. Pattee.
Andy Pattee. I'm the superintendent from the Cedar Falls Community Schools, and this is my 8th year within the school district.
Thank you. Dr. Selinger.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jared Seliger, president at Allen College in Waterloo. I've been president of Allen College for 3 years now, but I've been an employee of Allen College for 13 years. So glad everybody can join us this evening.
Fabulous. Dr. Lindeman.
Hello, Jane Lindeman, superintendent of Waterloo Schools. I have been with Waterloo Schools for 16 years, but the last 7 of them I've been the superintendent. Glad to be here.
Wonderful. And Dr. Holcomb.
Good evening, everybody. Todd Holcomb, president of Hawkeye College, and I've been here in the communities for about 18 months.
All right, fabulous. Well, we certainly welcome each and every one of you. Thank you for spending a little time with us, and thank you for sharing your expertise as well as your reflections about a book that we all think is pretty important. As you know, and as the audience knows, we only have 30 minutes. This is going to be from 6:30 to about 7. And then this is designed to give individuals an opportunity to go back to their respective book reads to begin a more vibrant discussion among others about these chapters that you will talk about tonight. But so let us begin. I think that one of the questions we would like to engage you with, for starters, is, was there an aha moment that occurred for you while reading through these beginning chapters of the book? And perhaps we will start with Dr. Lindeman. And please don't allow me to overlook anyone. I'm still trying to make sure I see everybody on my screen. But Dr. Lindeman, would you begin?
Yeah, thank you. I would say, I had actually an entire page of aha moments. And so I know that we only have 30 minutes. And so I'm just going to share a couple. So the very first one that popped out at me was, came in really early in the book. And actually, I think it was even before chapter 1, but it was talking about the fluidity of racism. And I thought for me, that was just a huge, a very interesting concept, but also a concept of hope. Because when it talked about, and I have the book in front of me, so I can reference it, but it says the good news of racism and anti-racism is that they're not fixed identities. And so, I kept thinking about different classes and different presentations and different conferences that I've been at that have talked about racism and institutional racism and, structural racism. And I don't know that had maybe ever been said just quite that way. So that fluidity, and I found that really a message of hope. Because if they're not fluid, then we have things that we can do, and there are intentional things that we can do to move in and out. So I thought that was a pretty big aha. The other one that I would share actually happened on page 16. It talks about, I actually highlighted it in my book in really, really broad font or broad highlighter, but the concept of, I think of the phrase is people of color don't need saving. They don't need saving, they need liberation. And that, I kept really as an educator, and we're all educators, but I kept going back to that phrase, thinking about maybe feeling a little bit convicted as an educator of going there in my mind, thinking, education is the great equalizer and we're the ones who can save. We're the, and so if you move away from if you're saving somebody, then somebody has the power and somebody needs the power. And so you're trying to do that. And so when this whole concept of not saving people, but liberating, they're enough. We are enough. People of color are enough. They have what they need. We don't need to develop them to get to be able to save them. We just need to liberate them and figure out, this concept of removing the policy issues that are maybe at the root of anti-liberation. So, that's a lot. I have pages of them, but that's kind of where I'll start the conversation tonight.
Wonderful. We thank you for getting us started. Dr. Colson, same question, sir.
I found the first 3 chapters really stimulating in several places. The piece that I guess I found myself thinking the most about was the discussion, the sort of historical discussion of Prince Henry the Navigator, and that was especially interesting to me. I grew up in Louisiana. Louisiana has something of a different history with race than the rest of the Deep South, partly because it was French and Spanish before it became American back in the early 1800s. And what's always been keenly, I guess, obvious to me is that race had to be constructed and had to be constructed in order for Europeans to feel okay about slavery. I mean, this is, and that Prince Henry the Navigator stuff really resonated with me, because not too long ago I read Jill Lepore's History of the United States, and she talks she works through the history of the United States and talks about how identifies that there was what would you call it, an intellectual problem at the founding of the country, that we believe that all men at that time are created equal, but then we had this other issue, and we had to buy into the European creation of race in order to justify slavery in conjunction. So we could hold these two contradictory thoughts together in our sort of historic minds, and that's fascinating to me. That whole the root, kind of the root of race in a social construction in order to justify the vile deed of slavery.
Yeah, we appreciate you bringing that out, Dr. Colson. And of course, as everyone knows, we have a native of Waterloo who is the MacArthur Genius Award recipient and a Pulitzer Prize winner, who says that America got started in 1619, not 1776. And I think you just said some things there that make us think about that whole thing a little bit more. But we certainly appreciate you sharing. Dr. Patty, I'm trying to get that name right, Dr. Patty.
Just call me Andy. That's perfect. So,
all right, Dr. Andy.
Yes, and again, thanks for having all of us. And a lot of times I follow Jane in speaking, and I just typically say ditto when she speaks and I'm up next. So, but I as a former social studies teacher, social scientist, there are so many points within the first 3 chapters that I found aha moments are just fascinating. as educators, I think one of the things that we say quite frequently, or I say quite frequently, is that education is not a spectator activity. You've got to be actively involved. And one of the quotes that I pulled out that I know I'm going to use it well into the future from this book is on page 23, and it says, "We can knowingly strive to be anti-racist. Like fighting an addiction, being an anti-racist requires persistent self-awareness, constant self-criticism, regular self-examination." If you are standing on the sidelines, if you're not actively involved, that is not acceptable. You've got to be actively involved to be able to help connect and interact change and make sure that that takes place. And when I was reading that, it brings me back to Beverly Tatum's book and talking about the conveyor belt of racism. And you actually have to be actively working to ensure change occurs. And that was one of the strong aha moments as I reflected and read through the first 3 chapters.
Wow, that's really great. Thank you. Thank you. And Dr. Holcomb?
Thank you for the question. Dr. Colson took my one on race on page 40, and then Andy took my one on page 23. So I'm going to go to my quote on page 29.
Okay.
You know, talking about double consciousness and the sense of always looking at someone's self alone through the eyes of others, I think was a real aha moment for me. In the fact that, you know, that happens. I know it happens. I know that we have to be aware of that. It's not something that I myself think about as a white male, but I know in talking with various Black students and administrators that it's very, very important for them to look at oneself through the eyes of everyone. And so I found that as an aha moment for me in the book.
Fabulous, fabulous. And Dr. Nook.
Thank you. You know, I agree with the others here. There's just so many in here. One of them, though, that stuck out, especially in light of some of the other things that I've been looking at and working on lately, is on page 19. And it's one that's going to challenge people perhaps the most in these 3 chapters. And it really talks about discrimination, and discrimination being racist or anti-racist. And just a couple of lines here. If discrimination is creating equity, then it's anti-racist. If discrimination is creating inequity, then it is racist. Someone reproducing inequity through permanently assisting an overrepresented racial group into wealth and power is entirely different than someone challenging that inequity by temporarily assisting an underrepresented racial group into relative wealth and power until equity is reached. And it really gets at the heart of what we wrestle with often about we've got to be equal and treat everyone equal. And we really need to treat everybody equitably. I've recently thought a lot about the word inclusion and what it really means. And I've always defined it to mean that, you know, inclusion is providing an opportunity for everybody to have an equitable chance at success. And equitable is really the key word. It gets really tricky to talk about equitability, though, because you want to use terms like their strengths and their challenges, their weaknesses, and you can get into a deficit mindset in a real hurry. And I really appreciate Gloria Ladson-Billings' work in this area, where instead of talking about achievement gaps in education, she talks about an education debt. That when in our education systems, and this will apply to economic systems and businesses as well, that if there is a group, Black students in our city, in our community, in our state, across our country, that don't achieve high school diploma, don't achieve college degrees at the same proportional rate as others, that isn't a deficit on them. It's us not being able to meet them where they are and see the challenges that they face as not their challenges, but challenges of our culture, challenges we've built, we've put in place. And now how do we bring the challenges down in an equitable fashion so that all students have an opportunity to be successful? And out of that, if we really are inclusive, we're really creating an equitable opportunity for everybody to be successful, we will have equal outcomes. And this piece is really getting at that. How do you deconstruct those, tear those apart so that you get the equity, not the equality?
Wow, that's great. It gives us a lot to think about. And Dr. Nook, you just reminded me, by the way, that we do want to acknowledge the fact that UNI is the entity that spearheaded this conversation that we're having tonight. So Gwen Berry has been doing a marvelous job. And of course, there is a community collaborative of beautiful individuals, gifted individuals who are working behind the scenes to make this happen tonight. So we just certainly want to thank you on behalf of the university and everyone else who is involved in this community collaborative. This is some great work. Interestingly enough, by the way, on this very day in 1962, Governor Ross Barnett orders state troopers to block the school entrance. Federal marshals intervene, and James Meredith becomes the first Black student to enroll at the University of Mississippi. And that was October 1, 1962. Not that long ago in the great schema of things. And when he was asked a little bit later, what do you remember most about that whole experience? He said that it wasn't about the education, really. It was about the power. It was about the citizenship. It was about the ability to do what I had a democratic right to do. And I think that's an interesting comment in light of what we're talking about, equality, equity, those kinds of things. This causes me to ask you another question. And Dr. Selinger, did I get a chance to ask you, sir, your comments?
Not yet. Thank you. Thanks everyone for being on the call tonight. You know, I think my aha moment was when we were reading the chapter on some of the definitions and talking about assimilation and how we try to assimilate groups of people to behave like others. And, you know, looking at the context of what we do within our institution at Allen College of, you know, we're training healthcare workers, predominantly nurses. And, you know, I think we try to assimilate our students into the profession of nursing, and nursing is a very noble profession. But in doing so, do we have an inherent flaw of trying to assimilate towards something that is stripping away the identity of Black students? And could that be some of the reasons why we're not seeing as many, you know, Black people pursue healthcare education, because we're trying to assimilate them to be something that they're not? So really, I had a lot of thoughts and just conversations with myself about, you know, what are we doing? I mean, with the confines of our institution, but then you look at the whole higher education sector as a whole and where we go, you know, the roots of higher education going back, you know, hundreds of years to, you know, the roots of the academy. And, you know, we probably have institutional racism that started well before any of our times, but through the course of decades, we're still continuing to precipitate them. And I think our students, you know, are probably suffering as a result of, you know, the origins of the academy. So that was really my aha moment.
Wow, we thank you for that. And by the way, Dr. Selinger, we really do appreciate previous year's support of the Freedom Bus Tour. Without the support and you and Dr. Joanna, I don't know it would be as eventful as it has been. So thank you. Thank you very much. Let's follow up with you, by the way. Was there something in the book, of course, that gripped you and disturbed you? Something that he said that you thought was highly controversial?
The first three chapters, there wasn't anything that I found to be, you know, overly controversial. I mean, I think the stuff talking about Henry the Explorer, about, you know, the assignment of race, you know, that dates back hundreds of years to Europe, or, you know, mostly because I'm just not as educated on European history as probably what I needed to be. But as far as something that's been highly controversial that I completely disagree with the author, that there wasn't anything that I found up in this point to be overly controversial.
Okay. All right, thank you. Dr. Colson, same question. Was there anything that disturbed you about this writing?
Well, I don't know if this will work for you, but what I appreciate the structure of the book, the way that it is autobiographical and jumps, kind of moves from autobiographical moments in the author's life to sort of a theoretical explanation of what was happening to him when he was younger. What I'm unsettled about, and I'm in a hurry to get to the end of the book. It seems to me that the things he's saying about his parents are really, they're troubling to me. I mean, I see his parents as good parents trying their very best to raise their son, and it seems to me that his reflection as he's an adult now, his reflection upon them is more negative than I wish it were. So I'm eager to get to the end and figure out if there's ever a kind of a reconciliation within the family, an intellectual reconciliation within the family.
That's a good point, and we appreciate that. And this has been brought to my attention, by the way, that we have about 10 minutes. See, when you have great minds together, I mean, time flies just like that. And we anticipated this problem, so we're going to try to keep it going. But Dr. Colson, I want you to know that the father must have had some degree of brilliance, though, because he highly encouraged his child to go to Hampton University. Now, that's my alma mater, and so he definitely had something good going on there for him.
Smart guy.
Yes. Dr. Holcomb, sir, what do you think? Was there anything that was unsettling for you?
Well, there was a passage on page 18 talked about racial inequity where two or more groups do not stand on equal ground. And I was reminded of Ronald Takaki's book, A Different Mirror, where the history of our country has been built on that. And if you look at that definition, then since the very founding of our country, there has been unequal footing with Native American and African American, but there's been a history of that throughout our whole entire country, and it just made me stop and think about that book, which was very, very powerful for me to look at the oppression that has occurred in many different races and ethnicities in our country's history.
Wonderful, thank you, sir. Dr. Nook, same question.
You know, it didn't hit me and in that way of being negative, but the passage that I read a little bit ago was the one that I recognized as being one that was going to be really challenging for people, right? About how you really look at discrimination and how you look at the difference between equity and equality and really get to the bones of what those mean when you look deeply into what that means for our policies. You know, it's easy to look at our policies and say, boy, these are just as equal as they can be. We're treating everybody fairly, and yet when you really pull it back, it means you're keeping the status quo in place. And so how do you change that? And you know, it's what most of us have called institutional racism, institutional genderism, and things of that sort. So it was a piece that I think gave me an opportunity to look much deeper into how some of these things work and what it means in our policies, in our communities, in our schools, in our businesses and things.
Wonderful, yeah, policies. Feelings versus policies, assimilationists versus segregationists. These are ideas that come up throughout these first few chapters. We appreciate you all hitting on all of them. Dr. Pattee?
I think similar to what others have talked about, you know, there wasn't anything that caused me great angst by any means, but something that caused me a little bit of cognitive dissonance was page 9, where it talked about, you know, being called a racist. It's not a pejorative word. And I thought that was really intriguing. It caused me to pause and to think, because, you know, if you have a racist belief, that's bad. If you are a part of a racist society, that's bad. But, you know, as I continue to read and reflect on that, when they went into depth and Kendi went into depth to talk about, it's really more of a descriptive word. It's not a reflection of the individual person, but something that might not even might not be aware of, that it needs to be identified. It needs to be a descriptor so we can ensure change. So somebody's made aware that that's a racist activity or a racist framework, and it's not necessarily pejorative in nature. And I thought that was interesting because that's just not how I would have interpreted it, but from his lens and from what he stated it makes sense, and it caused me just pause and reflection.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Did any of you read his first book, by the way, Stamped from the Beginning? I'm just curious. Okay. Yeah, it's just interesting that that book came out first and then this one. Dr. Lindeman, we want to give you the word on this one. You have the last word, I believe.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, you know, I wish that I didn't have to confess this, but I think that I found myself being unsettled by a lot of the data and the numbers and a lot of the facts that were written in there. And as I was reading them, if you could see my book, it's full of, you know, question marks like, could this be true? Is this for real? Is this, seriously? Question mark. And so I found myself reading something and then maybe stopping reading and Googling and finding out a little bit more. And I also found myself doing a lot of questioning and rationalizing, like, well, maybe there's probably more to that story, or there's probably a rationale for it. And I just found myself like questioning the data. And so I found that unsettling, but you know, there was a quote, probably the one that probably hit me the most in that was, it's actually on page 21 for anybody who wants to, it says, there may be no more consequential white privilege than life itself. And it went into talking about the 3.5 years longer life expectancy for white people. And it's really a good, conviction, I guess, in reading that, just thinking, I think it's going to be really fascinating to finish the rest of the book for that very reason. I think it's good to be called into question about, everything that you have believed and is it right, or, what that looks like. So I found it unsettling, but I'm anxious to read more to reach some resolution in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I want to give each of you, I guess, about 30, 40 seconds as our time is quickly dissipating. But James Meredith, he graduated, first Black student from the University of Mississippi, 1962, on this day. And again, for purposes of reiterating it, he said that it wasn't about the education, but it was about the power, the ability to do what everybody else was doing in a democratic society. It was about citizenship. Do you have any reflections about that as you think about Kendi and his writings? This is what we would give our people something to chew on intellectually as they get ready to go back to their book reads. But why don't we begin with you, Dr. Lindeman? Oops. Okay. Can you hear me? Is your mute still there?
It is.
Oh.
Can you start with someone else, because I missed
Yes.
a little bit of your question. I'm so sorry about that.
Oh, okay, no problem. Dr. Holcomb.
Yeah, I think it's very consequential that today we're talking about education on James Meredith introduction to and acceptance into the University of Mississippi. For years and years, the state of Mississippi underfunded historically Black colleges and universities, and it took an enormous amount of time to bring that inequity to light and then to resolve it. Earlier, we were talking about, I think the case was just settled in the year 2000. So these inequities continue to grow and take forever to address. And I think it's particularly unsettling that it takes us so long to address these issues and to create remedies to address past injustices.
Thank you, sir. And 30 seconds, Dr. Nook.
Yeah, I think it is, in many ways, it is about power, and I want to use that as a little p, right? But it's simply the ability to do what everybody else can do, and has the right to do. And we see that, I think, playing out in our country right now with the Black Lives Movement, the ability to stand up and talk about your feelings in public, to address the issues that are impacting us. It really is a powerful sort of response to the events of the day, and to be able to have that conversation, to be able to stand up and say, I need my voice to be heard. It's really reflects on that very, very well.
Powerful, thank you. Dr. Patti.
You know, I would say it's similar to what Dr. Nook said maybe 10, 15 minutes ago. But again, I think it's sometimes we view things that we see deficiencies in people rather than the policy. And I think that's something we need to grow in as institutions, as individuals, as society, to be able to really focus on what can we do to make change happen in the right way, the correct way, and not focus blame on people. And I think that's what happens. I know Kendi does a much better job explaining it than I did just there, but I think that was something that I think is extremely important.
You did a good job, sir. Dr. Sellinger, 30 seconds, please.
30 seconds. You know, I always say one of the three greatest days that I experience each year is when we have our college commencement. We're able to see the students through their education and get to the point where they're graduating, and to know that there's people in our country that don't get that opportunity because of financial issues or race issues, or any of the compounding factors that prevent them from pursuing their dreams and have that equity and that opportunity that everybody else has. So I think with today being that anniversary, I think it's fitting that a group of educators is in the room, and all of us can be a part of the solution to give everybody that opportunity.
I do too. And then Dr. Colson.
Yeah, I concur with exactly what Jared just said. We think as educators, we think about the potential of each young person, but then I also want to take the other angle, just really briefly. Think about, I mean, one of the terrible things to think about is how much American talent did we as a country deprive ourselves of, and do we continue to deprive ourselves of? I mean, we have all these young people, James Meredith and many, many others, who didn't have the opportunity to flourish, and that just made us all the poorer.
Well, I tell you, I certainly want to thank everyone. I'm pressed for time, actually, but I just want to give a wonderfully, big round of applause to all of you for spending your expertise and your time with us tonight to help jumpstart these conversations around How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. Our next conversation will be next Thursday, and it will be with law enforcement. But tonight, we do want to thank Dr. Lindeman, Dr. Holcomb, Dr. Nook, Dr. Patti, Dr. Sellinger, and Dr. Colson. Thank you so much for your time.
And thank you for moderating.
Yeah, thank you very much, Abraham.
You.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.